When does persistent curiosity cross the line into desperate obsession? And how do you distinguish between strategic due diligence and organizational indecision masquerading as patience? The Montreal Canadiens have been shopping for forwards for so long that the phrase has become a punchline in NHL circles. Yet here we are again, dissecting the same fundamental question. Are they actually building towards something concrete, or simply window shopping with no intention to buy? The rumor mill surrounding the Montreal Canadiens never stops churning, and the latest batch of speculation connects them to multiple forwards across different organizations, each representing a distinct philosophy about what this franchise should become. From rental wingers to long-term center solutions, from affordable depth pieces to premium-priced core players, the Canadiens' name surfaces in virtually every trade conversation. Yet, actual transactions remain frustratingly elusive. Jeff Gorton and Kent Hughes have built a reputation for exhaustive due diligence, for turning over every stone, for exploring every possible avenue before committing to action. This methodical approach has its merits, certainly, but at some point, reconnaissance must transform into execution. At some point, homework must yield to the actual test. The question facing Montreal's front office isn't whether they're doing their research, it's whether they'll ever be satisfied enough with their findings to actually pull the trigger. The latest reports from insiders Darren Dreger and Pierre Lebrun paint a familiar picture. The Canadiens are inquiring, exploring, investigating, and monitoring. They're linked to Vancouver Canucks forward Kiefer Sherwood, the player we've already examined extensively. They're connected to St. Louis Blues center Robert Thomas and winger Jordan Kyrou, two significantly different acquisition targets that would require vastly different asset packages and represent fundamentally different strategic directions. Let's cut through the speculation, examine the realistic possibilities, and determine whether any of these rumored targets actually address Montreal's most pressing needs, or if we're witnessing another chapter in the never-ending saga of Canadiens trade speculation that ultimately leads nowhere. We've already devoted considerable analysis to Kiefer Sherwood, but new information demands fresh examination. According to Pierre Lebrun, the Canadiens are among many teams that have inquired about the cost of acquiring the 30-year-old forward who's experiencing a career-best defensive season with Vancouver. The Canucks appear increasingly open to trading pending free agents, and Sherwood fits that description perfectly. Here's what bears repeating with emphasis. Sherwood is listed as someone who can play as a winger or a center, but that designation requires significant qualification. His face-off efficiency is abysmal, just 38% this season with a career average of merely 46%. In the modern NHL, where possession metrics and face-off wins directly correlate to scoring chances and defensive zone time, those numbers are disqualifying for anyone claiming to be a legitimate center option. Sherwood is currently on pace for a 36-goal, 12-assist prorated season, occupying the second-line left-wing position in Vancouver's lineup. His defensive numbers, typically solid throughout his career, have suffered a considerable downtick this season. A red flag that should concern any team considering a significant asset investment. His contract remains remarkably reasonable at $1.5 million annually, making him financially digestible for virtually any team. The Canadiens could absorb him without salary retention or corresponding moves, which explains part of his appeal. But here's the fundamental problem that no amount of financial flexibility can solve. As a winger, Sherwood doesn't address Montreal's most pressing organizational need, which is legitimate center depth. The Canadiens have been searching for a number 2 center since last season. They've made this need abundantly clear through public statements and private inquiries. Trading valuable assets for a winger, even a productive, physical winger having a career year, represents a deviation from stated priorities that demands justification. Unless Hughes views Sherwood as a complementary piece in a larger puzzle, this acquisition makes limited strategic sense. Now, we're talking about a completely different caliber of player and a fundamentally different type of transaction. Robert Thomas represents exactly what the Canadiens claim to be seeking. A legitimate top-6 center in his prime years who could slot into the number 2 position and stabilize Montreal's forward depth chart for the foreseeable future. The 26-year-old center fits Montreal's ideal age demographic perfectly. He's young enough to grow with the core, experienced enough to contribute immediately, and signed to a long-term contract that provides stability and certainty. His 8-year deal carries an $8.125 million annual cap hit. Significant money, but not unreasonable for a player of his caliber and potential. Thomas isn't enjoying his best season with the Blues, though context matters desperately here. It's extraordinarily difficult to evaluate any player performing for a struggling organization, and St. Louis is currently drowning in dysfunction. Every single skater in their lineup is underperforming relative to expectations, which suggests systemic problems rather than individual decline. Despite the team's struggles, Thomas leads the Blues in scoring with 4 goals and 13 assists in 23 games. More importantly for Montreal's specific needs, he wins approximately 52% of his faceoffs, a respectable efficiency that would immediately upgrade the Canadian center depth. His two-way reliability and playmaking ability would complement Nick Suzuki beautifully, creating a legitimate 1-2 punch down the middle. The cost of acquisition would be substantial, make no mistake. St. Louis would demand multiple first-round picks, high-end prospects, and possibly roster players. This isn't a rental situation or a salary dump. This would be a franchise-altering trade that commits Montreal to their current core and accelerates their competitive timeline. From a pure roster construction standpoint, Thomas represents exactly what the Canadiens need. He's the type of player you build around, the missing piece that could transform a promising young team into a legitimate playoff contender. The question isn't whether he'd improve Montreal's roster. He absolutely would. The question is whether Hughes believes the current core is close enough to contention to justify the massive asset expenditure required to acquire him. Jordan Kyrou represents a fascinating alternative that would address different organizational needs while creating new questions about roster construction and positional priorities. The 25-year-old winger excels in transition due to his exceptional skating ability, the kind of dynamic speed that creates odd-man rushes, stretches defensive coverage, and generates scoring chances through pure acceleration. Kyrou has reached the 70-point mark 3 times in his career, including last season, establishing himself as a legitimate top-6 offensive threat. His current season has been disappointing, with pace for just 47 points prorated, but again, context matters. He's playing for a dysfunctional Blues team that's failing collectively, not individually. More encouraging than his counting statistics are his underlying numbers, which remain excellent despite St. Louis's struggles. Kyrou continues to generate quality scoring chances, drive possession metrics, and create offensive opportunities at rates that suggest his current point production significantly underrepresents his actual contribution. He's signed to the identical contract as Thomas, 8 years at $8.125 million annually, and would command a similarly substantial return in any trade negotiation. The Blues were linked to trade discussions with Montreal earlier this season, suggesting at least preliminary conversations have occurred. But here's where Kyrou's situation becomes complicated for Montreal's specific needs. He's a winger, a talented, dynamic, potentially elite winger, certainly, but still a winger when the Canadiens have publicly prioritized center depth. Adding Kyrou would undoubtedly improve Montreal's forward group, but it wouldn't solve their most pressing positional deficiency. Unless Hughes envisions a scenario where acquiring Kyrou allows him to move another forward to center, or unless he's abandoned the center-first acquisition strategy in favor of best player available philosophy, this trade feels like a lateral move rather than addressing core needs. All of this speculation, all of these rumored connections, all of this persistent shopping for forwards activity raises a fundamental question about Montreal's organizational direction. What exactly are they building, and when do they plan to actually build it? The Canadiens have been looking to add a legitimate number 2 center since last season, according to multiple reports. They've been among the most active teams in the NHL's trade market when it comes to inquiring about potential price tags. They've had their name attached to virtually every available forward over the past 18 months. Yet, actual significant acquisitions remain absent from their transaction history. Gorton and Hughes deserve credit for their methodical approach and refusal to make panic moves. Due diligence is essential, particularly when contemplating franchise-altering trades that could define your competitive window for years. But at some point, analysis paralysis becomes its own form of organizational failure. The current rumor cycle perfectly illustrates this tension. Sherwood represents a complementary piece who doesn't address core needs. Thomas represents the exact player Montreal claims to be seeking, but would require massive asset expenditure. Kyrou represents elite talent at a position where Montreal already has depth. Each option presents distinct challenges, different philosophical implications, and competing visions for what this franchise should become. The reality is that trade rumors should always be taken with substantial skepticism. Most inquiries lead nowhere. Most conversations end without transactions. Most interest amounts to nothing more than general managers performing their basic job responsibilities. But the persistent pattern of Montreal being connected to every available forward while never actually acquiring impact players suggests something deeper, either extreme selectivity that borders on indecision or a fundamental disconnect between stated priorities and actual willingness to pay market prices. The latest batch of Montreal Canadiens trade rumors tells us more about organizational philosophy than about imminent transactions. They're doing their homework, exploring their options, and maintaining their reputation as one of the league's most active inquiry makers. But homework without execution is just theoretical exercise, and inquiry without acquisition is just window shopping. Kiefer Sherwood would add grit and secondary scoring, but doesn't play center effectively. Robert Thomas would solve Montreal's most pressing need, but would cost a fortune in assets. Jordan Kyrou would add dynamic skill, but at a position where the Canadiens already have talent. Each option represents a different path forward, a different strategic philosophy, a different vision for competitive timeline. The question facing Kent Hughes isn't whether these players would improve his roster. They all would, in different ways. The question is whether he's ready to commit to a direction, to pay market prices for impact players, to transform persistent curiosity into actual action. At some point, the most active team in making inquiries needs to become an active team in making acquisitions. The trade deadline approaches. The rumors will intensify. The speculation will multiply. And the Canadiens will undoubtedly be connected to every available forward in the league. Whether any of that activity translates into meaningful roster improvement remains the defining question of this franchise's immediate future. Which of these rumored targets makes the most sense for Montreal's current needs, Sherwood's grit, Thomas's center depth, or Kyrou's dynamic skill? Or should Hughes continue his patient approach and wait for the perfect opportunity rather than settling for imperfect options? The comments section is open for debate, and if you appreciate analysis that questions conventional wisdom and demands accountability from front offices, that like button is waiting for you. Let's discuss what the Canadiens should actually do rather than what they might theoretically consider doing. Word count, approximately 2,050 words estimated video duration. 10 to 11 minutes tone, skeptical, analytical, demanding action over speculation, emotional hook, frustration with persistent inquiry without execution.